Good morning. It is 9 o'clock on April 27, 2022. This is a work session of the Board of Supervisors. Approve the agenda, do we?
I have I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Who seconded? Hens.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Pixel, aye. Updates from the previous meeting. So, purpose of today's work session is just generally to talk about our process moving forward for all of the funding requests that we're receiving, whether we decide to go with ARPA funds or general funds or where we end up running with that, and just to let everybody know, I might stand up halfway through the meeting because my back is not doing very well. So if you hear me squeak or stand up, that's why.
One thing, a little update is after our last meeting, I was asked to outreach to Jamie Cashman with ISAC on that revenue loss and kind of uses of those funds. And so I spoke with them, and then I also emailed with a follow-up because I just like having things in writing and stuff. So I asked them on that general revenue loss, can we fund, certain projects? And I just gave some examples, like roads, bridges, other infrastructure or capital expenditures under the revenue loss. His response was yes, as long as it met the government services. You just use it in the checkoff box, as I think it's a checkoff box, so it would know of revenue loss. That's what it's used under. But there are those, certain limitations that still apply. Like you can't use any of the ARPA funds for debt services, or the stipulations that were that you can't use it. What you could not use it for under revenue loss, you still can't use it for those same things.
Great. Thanks for.
Yeah, and again, as long as it met that general government purpose or government service that met, those could be utilized.
And what you shared this morning, the spending on government services out of the treasury,
Right.
it gives examples, but it doesn't, it says common examples, although the list is not exhaustive. And I was just looking in the code a little bit, under 331.441, there's essential county purposes and general county purposes listed. And those were things that obviously counties can bond for, so I assume that anything that's listed under those definitions would suffice for being a government purpose.
I would think
I
so.
looked into it
I don't know,
just quickly,
Lisa.
but that's kind of what I've always looked at when I'm funding requests.
I was looking at the Attorney General opinion that the state auditors quote every time they do an audit.
Lisa, could you come up just so folks,
Yeah.
since we do have someone on Zoom, so people can hear us. You'll probably just want to stay up because we might have some other questions or close by.
I should go ahead.
Yeah, sure am. So, every audit that we get quotes the Attorney General opinion from April 25th of 1979, and I have it in my hand. I didn't make copies for everybody, but
I'd love a copy.
Yeah.
okay, I will just email you that
That would be great.
because I have it up on my computer still. And basically, it's 3 pages of Attorney General stuff.
79.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that one before, but I don't know.
But it says, the key is public purpose. Public monies may be spent only for the public benefit. Okay, so you have to justify public purpose when you spend the money. And while I know what you're saying about the code sections you were looking at, those are about county bonding. So I can see the
For
tie.
anything that isn't a public purpose.
Pardon?
Can we bond for anything that isn't a public purpose?
How would you justify it?
Exactly. So if we can bond for it, it's public purpose.
I'm not following you.
I think she's just providing some general examples,
Yeah.
like here's all the things that we know for sure would be okay
Oh,
to
okay.
do, but
Okay.
that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be something that isn't specifically listed in that code section.
Because it ends on the general code purpose definition, ends with any other purpose which is necessary for the operation of the county or health and welfare of its citizens. Which should fit really well with, just saying, if we're comfortable with about the benefit and can utilize it. Words.
Was there a different code section that you were looking at, Lisa?
No, I was not. I was looking at, I was just looking at the normal county home rule implementation, 331, 301.
Mhm.
So, I went through the, Story County Quality Life Alliance Analysis. Alliance. Went through the survey.
Community assessment.
The needs assessment, yeah, the SWALA. And the strategic plan and the C2C, and kind of pulled out some of the goals. And then made a list of priorities that I felt like have kind of bubbled up to the top as we've gone through the past couple years, just, in general. And so the goals for the needs assessment were mental health services, food security, housing, childcare, suicide prevention, and income. Our strategic plan lists quality of life, county operations, facility and infrastructure, technology, policy and regulations. And then the priorities that I just kind of jotted down were childcare, bridges, housing, food. I've got on my list, I've got arts and culture. That's not something that's popped up in our conversations, but that's just kind of on my list.
For this, that's pretty much what I had. I did also have broadband, and we have addressed that somewhat in ARPA, but I think we still want to, we want to continue to look at that because we're making progress, but we don't have a plan right now that gets us everywhere. So, countywide, so I'd want to keep broadband on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like the book as well. I took out mental health because the county can't fund that. That's all now funded to the state. So that's kind of taken out. It's still a priority.
Right, right.
But not something that we can fund through our county funds. I concur with broadband, food insecurity, housing, childcare, infrastructure, all those. I also kind of looked at looking at this treasury, our capital project plans, our CIP, and really kind of looked at what are our internal government services that could be funded or that we want to fund that could fit in this particular area. Because that's part of our charge is to, maintain what's within our specific purview, to make sure that we are maintaining that. And then also looking outside of that. I think one of the biggest things I heard when I was, first elected or appointed, I was campaigning previously, areas in the county that don't have access or good access to broadband. So that one was something that certainly elevated for me because that is still a struggle for folks to say, oh gosh, the speed I have is almost like dial-up. Or I really don't have, I'm using my cell phone for my internet access at home, and that's just not sufficient for them. So that was kind of an area for me. Looking at our roads and bridges, we talk about the safety of the citizens of Story County, and gosh, how many times have we seen on the news of Minnesota or out in Pennsylvania, bridges collapsing. They don't want our county, to have, to be newsworthy in that respect, that something like that has occurred. And then we just know in general, we've got a huge childcare shortage and housing. Housing is such a huge need out there. So those were kind of the areas that I looked at.
I have a couple others, and I think, which if you may mention a couple, I was trying to keep notes, but if I might.
Yeah.
I definitely have bridges on the list. I think that if there's something we can do to accelerate getting some of our bridges taken care of that are in worse shape, I think that would be good. The C2C and strategic plan, I also noted water quality in there and recreational opportunities. And back to childcare, I noticed that we're talking about what childcare did in the SWALA document. It talked about where the childcare deserts were in Story County, and that is useful. I also thought about climate change, but just from what I've seen with the city of Ames and what they've looked at, that's going to be huge and ongoing. And I don't know if there's anything we could do right now with funding, or whether we need to get some more information back, and maybe that's on a list for the next conversations. I just don't want to lose track of climate change.
Yeah, me either. I don't think what we're doing here is strategic planning. I just think the reason I suggested we go through all the plans is just to come back to what our identified priorities are for the county, to try and build a plan for how we're going to address asks that are coming our way, regardless of whether they're ARPA or not.
Did you talk about, did you bring up transportation?
No, it's not.
I would add it. I was going into the C2C, it talked a whole lot about roads and highways and railroads and things like that, but it didn't talk about public transportation very much. And I think it may not be now, but maybe on down the road, maybe it's a list of later on kind of things. So probably we need to read down a list and say what are things we think we can handle now. Not, or maybe we want to compare this list to some of the asks that we've hit.
That was kind of,
Is that what you were
well, it's
thinking?
kind of, yeah, my thought. And then I think we also just need to talk about what our process is for them. Are we going to
So I guess I have a question on the work session here. So are we looking at, and I'd like to hear from Lisa too, just some of our funding sources that potentially we have to tap into. Looking at the list, because we have a number of people that have come to us, and we'll have more that will come to us with requests. Are you saying you want to look at, okay, they've come to us, what's our process for funding them? Are you looking at compared to some of our current ones that we have under the 5-year plan? I just want to make sure that I'm clear, so that I'm clear at our discussion today.
Yeah, so I was thinking, let's talk about what our identified priorities are as a county in general. Let's just make sure we're clear on what those are. And then talk about the asks that we received. All the while being mindful that we have the ARPA money still. Where do we want to direct the ARPA dollars? I just felt like I feel like we're playing defense. I feel like we're just responding to everything rather than saying, well, these are the priorities that we have. And so that's how we're going to handle the asks coming our direction. Like, how do we prioritize? And then what's the process for people when they are coming to us? Are we, if it's something that we think we might fund with ARPA dollars, does it make sense to say, okay, that's something we think we'll fund with ARPA dollars, we want you to fill out the application that others who we have funded with ARPA dollars have filled out. And, you know, I mean, do we want to have a separate process for those?
Let me make a proposal for a process and feel free, I wasn't, just started going, second cup of coffee this morning, so this may not be in good shape. So feel free to say, I should wait till the third. First step I would have is, we have requests we have received so far in the past few months and had presentations on. So those are what I would call formal requests for funding that people have made unsolicited. They've come to us. I'd say the first step would be to address all those requests in an upcoming board meeting. We could have discussion on whether to fund and at what level. Good information to have to do that would be from the auditor staff, possible sources of funding for each request. Some of these would be, most of these would be one-time, you know, could be out of one-time funds, ARPA, I don't know what we are on TIF, but you know, whatever we have available. Or also ongoing revenues like general funds and other county funds. You know, so that we have an idea of how much we might have, you know, an idea of how we would fund the request, not just to say, find it, you know, have some idea ahead of time. And then I'd like to discuss reserving some funds for some specific purposes. I had listed broadband, bridges and culverts, and the county debris site that we are negotiating on right now. So basically that, let's get, you know, we've got some requests we've had for a while. Some of which are brand new from just, you know, earlier this week. Yesterday, how time flies. Some of them we've had for a few months. Let's look at those people who have made formal requests for us, given us enough information that's actionable. Let's look at doing something with those first. And then, like I said, let's plan to reserve some money, we don't know how much, for some of the other things. I think it'd be nice to have something from our county engineer, a plan for what he could reasonably do in the next year or two. Additional bridges from what he's already said he could do, because we still have to have, and I think I remember this correctly from the discussion down at ISAC, we still have to have all the ARPA funds expended by 2026.
Right.
Even though they're just the general revenue loss funds, they all have to be out there. So maybe we could ask the engineer, say, what else could you get done in the ARPA funds if we were to save some ARPA funds?
I think it's also worth noting that we don't need to hold some, we need to get it spent, like we need
We need to
to,
get it spent.
need to
It
get
might
it-
free up other monies.
we need to get the, yeah, so I don't know that we want to look at it quite like that as, I think, and which is why I think it's important that we identify what our priorities are.
And I think along that line, I agree, Linda, broadband, I think all of us have
Yes,
spoken on broadband. But you hold it back, or you could say, well, that's an identified area. You can have kind of a placeholder of saying, okay, we want to, throwing out a number, $1 million for broadband. Like I said, I'm just throwing a number out there, so that you know that you're, okay, that's at least what we want there, or we want money to go towards the debris site. We've got a general idea of maybe what that's gonna cost. You know, kind of put that in a, your spreadsheets slide or whatever, so that we know that we're putting that in there. So in some respect, you're kind of putting it aside, but we've already identified this is what we want to put it for. Does that make sense? I don't drink coffee anymore, so.
That's how we're having trouble communicating. Okay, well, Mountain Dew, whatever.
Yeah.
Caffeine. So how do we want to go about, okay, what I hear is agreeing on is let's identify priorities. Should we just individually of the ones we talked about, may go through them and do it individually first, write down what our top 5 priorities are, and then see how we met.
Yeah.
Here's the list I have. Food security, transportation, childcare, water quality, recreation opportunity, housing. I would say broadband, bridges, and climate change. Some of those are long-term. Those are the ones I got.
Can you say those again?
Food security, transportation, childcare, water quality, recreation opportunity, housing, broadband, bridges, and climate change. And I'd almost say maybe climate change should be on the list because we don't really have something identified. Should we take it off for now?
No, I think it's okay to leave it on there.
So top 5, let's say in the next short term. Kind of ish.
Line 7. I need to narrow that down. I said like infrastructure as well. Water quality initiatives, transportation, housing, food insecurity, and then childcare.
Are you talking about what you voted on or what you've got on your list?
No, that's what I've got on my list.
What's infrastructure?
That is right, roads and bridges.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why it's much of it as infrastructure.
Not 5.
No, it's 7. I'm looking at what I cut out of that.
Yeah, childcare and bridges were at the top of my list. Childcare, bridges, housing, food insecurity, arts and culture, transportation. Broadband.
I think one thing with transportation is.
I haven't voted yet.
We're not
We're
voting.
not voting.
We're
I
just
thought we
making a
were gonna-
list. No, we're
Yeah, I don't
just,
have my list done yet.
oh, I thought you read us your
I read the
list.
whole list.
Oh,
So everybody had them all. I'm sorry.
Oh,
oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I misunderstood.
Okay, well, you both did, so I was not communicating very well.
I think the transportation issue, the housing issue, those are monsters.
And I think the transportation issue, for one, there is more information that I'm trying to get in regards to like the number of rides, the denial of rides, what the reasoning, all of that. So to say, while transportation is a priority, I also feel like I need to drop that down a little bit because I don't have all the data that I'm seeking. I know there's been a number of studies out there. I know the league has completed kind of a review, and we'll have some of that information as well. I've reached out for some additional information. So hopefully pulling some of that together will help provide some direction. And some of the transportation or the barriers are budgetary. And it's where can you come in and help support that? But there's certain criteria for paratransit that you have to fall under, right? So that's a barrier in itself.
Okay, I've only got 4. And I did it in terms of not just priorities, but things that I thought we could move on quickly. We have proposals on. I have childcare. Get proposals quickly. Second one was bridges. Third, water quality. 4, recreation opportunity. There's some other things I think are great. I'm interested in broadband, but I don't think we're still collecting some data in our group. I don't think we have anything that we can move on right now there, but I would like that to be considered later. But those are the 4 that I think. And I also would note that there are a couple of other proposals that we've gotten lately that I'd like us to consider that really don't quite fit into some of those that I think are.
And then to me, that makes sense to me as well, but I don't feel like I have enough right now. And we haven't had any asks on the transportation side. As well. I mean, we kind of know there's a need, but we also know that in some of the rural areas, neighbors take care of neighbors. So really getting some good, strong data. I know we've tried to get some of that over the past year. The accessible transportation group is trying to do that. Well, that was in the midst of COVID. So they couldn't hold any in-person kind of town halls. It was all, kind of more Zoom related to reach out. I don't feel like we've got complete information.
We got a little bit of talking to the Johnson County supervisors and ideas and things, but not real in depth of what they were doing in Johnson County.
Yeah, I talked with them on their seats program. But
Yes.
they did provide additional funds for a couple of years, to their paratransit, for folks who, I think they met the disability, but they expanded out the financial criteria portion on it. They don't know what they're gonna do after like a year, but they said to do that, they did extensive town hall meetings in all their, in their communities. And they're just doing it rural. They're like, we're not targeting like Coralville. They're gonna do their own thing, for example. But they did a lot of work to determine that they wanted to allocate some funds. So I don't feel like we've done enough of that to say, let's move forward in
I
that.
think we're gonna get whatever the league has, initiated in terms of study. We get that,
Right.
review that, then maybe we can think about a second phase
Right.
of that. And I agree that it's probably takes more resources than we can put into one study.
And there's a number of transportation coalitions out there. I think it's not only saying, hey, we want to provide transportation. I think we also need to identify what type of transportation are we providing and what do we want to be providing. And I think everybody's got differing kind of thoughts on that. You need to come together and say we need to at least basically be providing this. This is our bigger goal, but let's make sure we're doing this first.
What do you think about the idea of just first looking at the proposals that we have been getting, the asks?
I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that we have a process that's fair for people. And I don't want it to be, I just want it to be fair. I'm sure there are others that would also be coming forward if they thought, oh, well, they might be thinking about spending more of that money or funding X type of projects or whatever. And I guess that's what I mean by I feel like we're playing defense.
Well, so are you saying that all the people who have come to us with proposals, you would ask them to resubmit those proposals through the ARPA process, whether or not we would fund them with ARPA? See, one of our problems is that we just don't have a process. It has been historic with this board. People just come at any time and say, we'd like the county to fund this or that. And that has some dysfunction to it. But at the same time, we went through a very extensive ARPA process that took so much
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And everybody had a shot at that process. To do that again, I think would just bog us down.
I don't relish the idea of doing all of that again.
I don't think-
but
I mean, there are places, and I'm not saying, there are counties and cities who didn't do anything nearly like what we did. Just their names didn't have a process. A lot of counties didn't. They just said, we have enough internal things, we'll just use the ARPA money on our own stuff. We've gone, you know, some other counties did as we did, and some of them we utilized their information to kind of help craft our process, but I don't think if there's an additional round here, it needs to go to that extent, because we really, that's really not my thought. We need to get moving on these things.
I think so too. I also think if we want to come up with a more formal process where we say, I think we kind of have that, but people still
Just
just come
don't-
to the
people
board,
don't follow
and
it,
do
yeah.
That is we have to be more strict on that, or we say, okay, 4 times a year you can come to the board. You know, each quarter,
Right.
if you have your requests that we'll take under consideration. But if you're outside of that, you know,
You know, and there's some things we could do with that. When you said 4 times a year, I thought, maybe that's too much. And I thought, wait a second, a lot of the things we get asked for are matches for catalyst grants. Catalyst grants has some specific deadlines, and I think they are 4 times a year, aren't they, Greg?
Catalyst is early in the year, January, but then you also have CAT and other state grants staggered throughout the year.
Right, there are lots of grants with different
Yeah,
deadlines.
so-
and
But we
matching
could do a
deadlines.
quarterly kind of thing and maybe look at some of those deadlines, knowing that those are things that, you know, communities can't get catalyst grants without county involvement. You know, we could, but I wouldn't, it's gonna take a while to set up a process. We can look at some things. I know City of Ames has one, I think it's called their fall grant program or something. I looked at that once, but we could look at that. But it's gonna take some time to set it up and some discussion of what do we want. And in the meantime, we've got these asks. So I guess what I'm suggesting is we look at the requests we have now. We say, what are the possible ways to fund this? What kind of monies do we have in that pot of money?
Does it meet the public purpose? And
Does it
can we
meet
make it fit the public
purpose?
purpose?
Exactly. Can we justify that in terms of public purpose?
Right.
I didn't know the correct process. So we're gonna raise it.
Well, we're not really taking public comment, but. it's- we want to take public comment.
but you could do that.
Do it to share. Yeah.
It's a work session.
I would just bring up another consideration too, is the fact being that the governor's office has made it clear that she's going to be allocating ARPA money throughout the rest of the year. So having your process set up is going to help you avoid these headaches, which I'm expecting 2 to 3 months of rollout of funding from the state ARPA funds continuously for the next year. And it will help you, I think, if you set that process up.
Yeah, so having two different conversations happening at the same time. What are we gonna do with the asks we've gotten already? And what's our process of like moving forward? I think that every quarter is a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that would be helpful to us to say, you know, that's the date, whatever, when we want things in by, or, you know, if that's what we're kind of wanting, so that we can then review at that particular time. I do think for right now, because we do have a number of requests, and some that are on a specific timetable, they would like to hear back yea or nay from us. Would like to be able to provide that and then continue to work on what do we want to have set up, and what you know, what do we currently have set up that we just haven't been following, or yeah, we've been loosely following. And do we want to do something like Ames does? They've got their fall grant. Is that something we want to look at? Maybe it's not, because we're different. We've got like our facade grant and you know other things out there. So maybe that's not an avenue.
Well, and maybe we wanna, during budget time, say, okay, this is how much we're willing to set aside for projects. And any asks that come to us, we're not gonna consider them until this, then, you know, these are, once a quarter, we'll consider asks, and however they fall in.
I was at a meeting Monday night and was talking with one of the Hardin County supervisors, and they said, one, they don't get a whole lot of asks to the county. But what they do is, for them, folks come prior to their budget time and they just build it into their budget. And
That's another option then.
that's what they do.
But
it's
is that
still-
come one, come all, or is there some kind of criteria as to who can do an ask?
And that I don't know.
See,
I was
that's-
at another board meeting, so I wasn't getting into all the details while I'm in a different board meeting on that. Again, smaller county, you know, that it may just have been kind of historically, folks didn't go to the county for funding, where we have a little bit more of that here. How that would work, I just
It would
don't
be
know.
nice if we looked at the other grant projects processes that we have right now and review those and say, are those still useful? I mean, they were at one time, some get, you know, quite a few asks, some don't, maybe combine them into something else, not have so many different little grant projects going on. Figuring out a way to combine them might be useful, streamline it. I think what we have already and like adding another 2 or 3 things into it. I just want to look at the whole thing. And that's going to take some time to see how do we structure this.
Okay, well,
It's okay if I like ask, at least I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, and I'm sure you don't know number wise, but can you just talk a little bit to, you know, where, like, if we could look at like loss funding or general betterment or ARPA, or what are areas we might be looking at?
The local option sales tax, the budget that we put together for next year, for FY '23, has an estimated 218,000 in it that could be allocated to general county betterment in the unincorporated area is how it's termed, okay? For instance, there are certain, as you're all 3 aware, there's certain things that we pay for out of that pool pot, including libraries. We're doing the Nevada Field House for the next 2 years out of that. We have paid for, we pay for the libraries out of that. We've paid for the Slater Pool, the Roland Pool, I think, projects. You know what, you get what I'm,
so it doesn't, it's not restricted to unincorporated areas.
no. I guess I would deem it as, it's paid for out of rural funds. It's to benefit the unincorporated area, and I think that the overlying arc of that is unincorporated would be small communities too. You know what I'm saying? They are not in the unincorporated area, but the small community help is in there.
For instance, the libraries.
The libraries have to be paid for from the rural fund, so that makes it fairly easy to pay for it out of that, those
And
contracts.
equivalent of small community, unincorporated, people who live in the unincorporated areas benefit from.
Yeah, I mean, we pay
Yeah.
based on, we give money to the libraries based on what their unincorporated area usage is.
Do we also do, like the Historical Alliance or, is it 4-H or the county fair out of?
Okay, those all have to be paid for out of the general fund for the code.
So those.
So those allocations that you do every year for those services are
two.
paid out of our countywide general fund.
Okay,
Now, again, general county services would qualify there for the 10 million revenue loss if you're looking at using some dollars for that purpose, those purposes. My opinion, as if it matters.
And roads and bridges,
Correct.
we can pay for those out of general, but we don't have to use secondary roads funding.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. That's an interesting little twist in that, because I know Darren has certain requirements he has to meet when it comes to all of that, but there's nowhere in the code that says you can't use general fund services for secondary roads. that I've ever come across. Because there are counties, and this was years ago, that I had a conversation with one of my state auditors about it. There are counties that just pay for certain things out of their general fund. For secondary roads. For roads, bridges, whatever.
You're saying in FY '23, there's 218,000 in local option sales tax funds that could be put to some of these things we've been asked for.
Correct.
And
That's my assumption. I mean, obviously, until I know more about how much we're actually gonna get in
Mhm.
local option sales
Sure.
tax funds, this is a swag at this point in time.
Mhm.
So there's, yeah, 218 is what's budgeted to be left over there for 23.
so here are the things that we've had presentations or asks on recently. One airport,
We've gotten something from them.
Mhm.
I think Sandra attended the meeting.
Yeah, they emailed the general information ask, and then there was a presentation. at
I have a couple
The
of
chamber
questions.
for
Could I ask some questions about that?
Yeah,
Okay, they asked for 2 million from Story County and cities, according to their PowerPoint, the slide in their PowerPoint. I've got a note here. The 2 million, they wanted $500,000 a year for 4 years. So was that consistent in their verbal presentation, that that was to be from everybody who was going to contribute in Story County? Not just the county government?
Yeah, they had it broken down by cities and there was about over 800,000 from the county
mhm.
based
Like
on.
the county would make up the difference.
Oh, did they have the cities for sure? Or I never saw those.
That's on one of the slides that they,
They
I
had
think I saw
3
that,
cities. I think it was Ames, 3 or 4 cities,
Maybe it was-
Ames, Huxley,
Nevada.
Story City, Nevada. And then the rest they,
So it really 800,000
it
from.
was over 800,000. I don't remember exactly how much. You want a copy of that, please?
Sure.
Could I have a copy of it?
I didn't see.
I had
those.
heard rumors, I just didn't know that they'd actually asked.
Yeah,
So what, have the other cities agreed to do it?
They haven't been to the board and made the formal request. They
Right.
made a presentation to several jurisdictions saying this is what we want.
I don't think they've gotten an answer from anybody yet.
so were they planning to come to us?
Well,
When the board says,
When we
One of-
asked, invite
one of
them?
one of the things that, part of the conversation was, well, let's wait and see what money you may or may not get from this grant that you've applied for through the state. And then we can
Okay.
talk about it again. But whatever grant they get from the state is not going to impact their ask of the counties, because they're going to have to bond
Anyway.
so
So
much.
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter as far as what they're gonna ask for.
So 800,000 is a kind of number there. Ames Indoor Aquatic Center, 500,000. And I was told they're applying for a catalyst grant this July or mid-July. And they do need to show county support for a catalyst grant. First Park Library, we all heard that the other day, 160,000, and I saw in their letter that Story City was levying 120. Slater Daycare, 50,000. Heartland Senior Services, I've heard 300,000 and 200,000. Did they say 300,000 when they
Said 300,
300,000?
that in our conversation.
That Ames History Museum was 200,000 was the ask. They said the city of Ames was contributing 150,000. So less than they asked of us. And it may not grant deadline. Mike Cox also sent us all an email about the possibility of could ARPA funds or some funds be used to match a state tourism grant application to finish the Harbor Nature Trail paving. He suggested 3 million, I think he said it was 3 million, would bring in an additional 2 million of tourism grant funds, so we'd be paying the majority of the funds, if I understood that correctly. And the debris side is another one-time thing. I don't know if we have a number on that. Those last two then would be internal. So those are the things I think we're looking at. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right on that. Those are the known
Those are the knowns.
ones.
We've had presentations or correspondence from county staff. So those, there's been a lot of, some other mentions of, oh, yes, some communities thinking about it this, some communities thinking about it that, but I have not heard or seen anything formal that gives us even an idea of what some of the asks would be if they were to come. I've got some notes on those, Lisa, if you want to.
I try to put them off the agenda when they officially come to the agenda.
Hmm?
I said I tried to print them off and have them on my desk for when they officially come.
So some of those, you know, a good share of those I think do kind of fit in with the priorities we just kind of went through. So,
I'm having a problem with the private business. I know it fits the overwhelm or the needs. I'm just having a problem with the private business.
The only thing I could say is, and again, it goes back to what I was looking at 331, the definitions, and I don't think they really apply. Would it? Did with the ARPA.
Agreed, you did with the ARPA.
We did it with the ARPA and it seemed to fit, right?
For childcare, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, that was different though. That was for supplementing wages for retention. pay, And this is for
Okay, child-
construction.
This is for construction.
But could we not work with the city and support the city in their effort to bring in childcare? So rather than this being something that we're doing directly to that business owner, could we not work with the city?
Is the city helping fund it?
Well, they were going to give them $100,000 loan. And then that got crosswise with their other loan because they couldn't get the SBA loan. If they had other loans as well, they were going over the loan limit. So they came to us first, is my understanding. The city would consider 50, or they were going to ask the city for 50,000 in the grant, us 50,000 in the grant. I don't think the city's done it yet. I think they were waiting to hear if we were going to. Is that kind of?
I think that's.
It's a good point, you know, yeah, we did it under ARPA, and we granted some money to a private daycare under ARPA, but it was for wages, which was an ARPA allowable thing. This would get us into the ARPA infrastructure, which talks about public buildings. So it really probably, even if we were to say we can use ARPA, we really can't use ARPA. So then we're saying, how do we justify spending taxpayer money on private business? Right? Who do we,
which is Heartland Senior Services, and the daycare.
But Heartland is
Heartland's a
a
nonprofit.
nonprofit. So I think it's a little different.
They're not a private entity. They're a nonprofit.
And I mean, I think childcare is also a workforce development thing. I mean, the issue too. So I think there are ways that we can support communities supporting childcare. I get the issue of supporting a private business.
I thought oftentimes allowed counties to provide some funding to businesses.
Economic development type. and
Yeah.
childcare type. Well, then it would go. That would be under the ARPA request area, as opposed to the revenue loss general county services. In my mind, that's how that works.
yeah, but it gets it back into the infrastructure, which was such a morass.
Yeah, then it's a capital expenditure.
Mhm. It's almost too bad, I mean, let me ask you this, if a private business that provided a service like childcare were asking us for operating funds, could we do that? If we were saying what citizens got out of that was reduced rates or something like that? I don't know, I'm kind of listening. I mean, we do that, I mean, I'm looking at our asset funding and things we do through asset.
So your asset funding is, and we don't just give them money.
No,
They have to say, we provided this amount of service to, for this rate. I mean, there's,
and here we're just being asked, and I'm not saying it's not an ask, but it's important to residents who are saying, help us start a business because the community needs this business.
Help us expand our business.
Yeah.
She has a business already.
She has home daycare.
Right, so I'm looking at impacted small businesses and disproportionately impacted small businesses on the treasury. To disproportionately impacted small businesses includes the following enumerated uses which have been expanded into the final rule. And one of them is support for micro businesses, including financial, childcare, and transportation costs.
Support.
Think that chapter would fall into that?
Are they disproportionately
right.
impacted?
Well, yeah.
So, I mean, and we have it impacted and disproportionately impacted.
She's expanding, so the question is, was she impacted? In the law, she's expanding, so there's a need out there.
But how do you relate it to the pandemic and being impacted by the
Well, unless there are
pandemic?
other areas that are closed. You know, are there other daycares that have closed? You know, because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think maybe this is,
I don't want to be like I'm trying to justify her the reasoning or whatever.
no, I
I'm
know
just-
that, I mean, I think I was just coming at it from a different angle, and if it's an effort of the city of Slater, to support a business in their community that will support economic development in their community, then it would be a matter of saying, well, then the city of Slater would need to come to the county.
You can acknowledge, Greg, if you want to acknowledge.
I'm sorry,
Well,
You go first.
Well, along those lines, we have the Story County Economic Development Group that the board of supervisors financially supports. And part of the bylaws, commercial development is one of the eligible economic development activities. Commercial development is pretty broad, could it expansion of an existing business or new business. If the board were looking for solutions and fund projects outside of the ARPA funding stream, increasing the amount as contributed towards the strike and economic development group in that process. Because then they would recommend finance or funding to the board of supervisors.
So we'd have to increase it enough to make this, to meet this need, and then we've probably increased it forever, and there's gonna be more people going.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a way, that'd be another way, set of eyes to evaluate proposals before they come. They're specifically tied to communities.
And specifically tied to economic development and with that.
But we would also be making a long range,
Setting a precedent.
setting a precedent and saying this money's gonna be available from here on out. And that gets to me in terms of our ongoing process issues rather than getting some things done with these applications. That's my
Well,
concern.
I think the question is whether you're saying that money is available. I mean, it's like with anything with your budget, you budget in what you're putting in for that particular year. So you can say this particular year, we're putting in more money. But next year, we may review the budget and say, we don't have that amount of money that we can sustain it at this particular level. You know, you don't like necessarily doing that if you don't have to, but that's why you look at things where you budget for.
Are you having, go ahead.
I was gonna bring up too, that childcare summit we were at that one together. The city is gonna be a viable partner using urban renewal areas or TIF or some other capacity as well.
For Roland.
For rolling for childcare, because they are losing half their local providers. And they're facing a workforce crisis as well. So the city has identified that as a workforce priority, which would then qualify that for the ARPA money that you can allocate. So that's another option for you as supervisors to use the communities themselves along with the story development.
So Lisa, do you think that's legitimate way we could look at if we want to fund something like that? Run it through the city or the economic development group. I don't know how that makes it okay to. I'm not convinced that.
Somebody told me one time that if you have to go that far to think of how it meets the public purpose, does it really meet the public purpose? That's what some wise person told me. I mean,
Yeah,
and this is a whole new ballgame with these funds. But you still have to
Go through the exercise.
go through the, make sure you're meeting the public purpose of public funds. That's why I spent 3 weeks trying to report out what we'd spent money on, so that we can prove that it's all transparent and we're meeting the public purpose.
Right.
And that was not a fun exercise for Lisa, FYI.
the list that I read off to you guys, you've got concern on Slater. You have the concern on Martin Senior Services, but it is a nonprofit. Did you have a concern with any of the others in terms of public purpose?
The fact that it's a nonprofit does not enter into it.
It doesn't?
not for me, it's a public, it doesn't meet the public purpose. That's where I'm at with that one, and I have been from day one.
We should really have housing plan administration in that list too. Are we going to put out an RFP for the housing plan? Housing action plan?
I don't know, that's a decision we have to make. I did have it on my list and I had it as an ongoing. That was the one thing I didn't know that it fit into this discussion, if we were talking about just one-time things or we were talking about ongoing expenses.
The aquatic center's probably also on that list for me, but
But you said that we put money towards this later, we will enroll in.
and Nevada. Faucet, yes.
So we've got a precedent.
Yeah, how it,
Yeah, and those funds have all come from local option sales tax. If you want to pay for it, if you're interested in paying out of the 10 million revenue loss, yeah, it's public purpose on there, go.
I'm sorry, I need to say that back to you to see if I understood. You're saying it would be okay to pay for the, if we were going to contribute toward the aquatic center, okay to do it on local option sales tax, but not general fund?
No, I said that we have paid for the other ones out of local option sales
Okay,
tax.
Gotcha.
Okay, out of the 40% general county betterment. And as we talked about, that's one of those primarily to benefit the unincorporated areas. Is that how you want to measure that one? Are you doing it? Are you contributing to that for people that may use it outside of Ames? Then yes, it could fall under that general county betterment dollars. Or do you want to just use ARPA dollars, say general county services, not ARPA, revenue loss ARPA dollars,
Right.
and say general county services, because it does get used by outside of Ames residents, or may get.
I don't see the same thing then. Heartland situation, because they provide service to people outside of Ames. I mean, right, just for discussion, you get people coming into their center from outside of Ames, while some of the other communities, they obviously, Story City may also have a senior or community center. They also do get folks that come in their center as well.
Day services.
They're day.
Day services, people throughout the county get Meals on Wheels, which are delivered by Heartland.
We pay, which asset helps fund per meal.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, where do those services get provided from if Heartland doesn't have a building, have a facility? Their adult day is down considerably because they're doing it out at Green Hills right now. Space that Green Hills is loaning them. They can't meet needs forever out of borrowed space or people working at home.
Right, and they're only doing that because
They tore down the
they
building.
tore down their building and getting their new building.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a short-term situation.
Yeah, but the reality I'm trying to say is to provide those services to seniors throughout Stewart County, they need a building to operate at.
Right.
So I don't see that as, in terms of public purpose, I don't think I see it.
But I do understand what you're saying with the daycare. Yeah. Specific to a private business, and I know they're also on the timeline. Even if we looked at saying we wanted to increase the allocation amount to the County Economic Development Group. Is that enough? I mean, I think they need to know by the end of this month. 29th or 30th.
Yeah, they should have a deadline extended a little bit.
Did they? Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that you need to go through there, and then it gets approved. Doesn't it get approved for the entire group? Don't the applications through the SEPC?
Yeah, and that process, application, we start discussing in July.
What's the deadline for applications?
Oh, yeah. It's usually 2 weeks prior to the October. It's pretty informal.
Okay, so how do I say this question? If it's not legitimate for the county to directly give funds to a private business, how is it okay for county funds to be given through the private business if we run it through somebody else?
Well, Leanne, this may be word that you need to respond to. So where have funds through the Economic Development Group generally gone to? Have they gone to help private businesses and communities? And maybe that's something you need to get back to us on. I mean, if we're not making decisions here, it may be something that's something
We're
I'd like
identifying
you to provide that information back to us. So when we bring this to a board decision, I have that to say.
I can do a full history of where projects have gone. I know, seem to recall monies went towards the I-35 project in Missouri City. Development group a few years ago, but I'd have to delve into it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're smaller, and the projects are smaller in size.
Right. No, I get that, but that's what I'm just saying. Are those funds only going towards, public? I mean, I guess I look at childcare, it's helping a business in a particular community. I'd have to relook because I just don't have it up. Kind of your criteria, what's the charge of that particular group and where those funds have generally been allocated to.
And we've got facade grants too. Do those-
Yeah, and I was just thinking about that. That is exactly why the communities are the applicants.
Okay. But then the communities do pass it on to private businesses.
And they provide a match, yeah. But that's a model purposefully designed.
So that we can help support economic development.
So what I'm kind of hearing is for the childcare grant, it almost sounds like if the community would have applied for a grant as a match to their grant.
If that would be a direction that, there would be a substantial increase in the amount allocated to Story County Economic Development Group. Or even aside from that, I think at Slater, I don't know. I'm still with Lisa on this one that using art.
Yeah, no,
This
I know,
one,
I'm
Using
using
any funds.
and I'm just, I wasn't thinking ARPA necessarily, I was thinking any, I just was trying to understand the process for that particular grant.
Yeah,
And maybe that's gonna take a little more delving into.
the Story County Economic Development Group is pretty informal. How that process works. I say informal, but we do record keeping that too, but they have like 2 weeks to put projects together and respond back. And then the group, as you all know, discusses the projects, decides what level to fund them at, provides a recommendation to the board, and the board decides on that. There's $10,000 and under.
always won as much as we'd like to, it's just not one. that we can- At least not at this particular time. It may be something that we have to say, this isn't the avenue that it could be. Maybe that it could be done through.
I can, to answer it, but I can get a back altered, what the historical use of those funds. Spreadsheets. In my files here somewhere.
That would be helpful.
I think another thing to add to possible internal things is funding for Office 365.
That's a long range.
It's a long range. I mean, in the next year, because
Under under ongoing or.
well, I don't know that it would be ongoing. I
It's
think it
not
would just be
ongoing, so-
internal.
Yeah, a longer range internal.
I know our contract is for another year. I think it's what she said, but the transition will be costly. And I don't know what that.
We weren't
means
asked for anything for that for a budget for 23.
One more year, that'd be 24.
Yeah,
I said we weren't asked for 23. It
Because
would
our
be-
contract's not up, so we have one more year.
So I would see that going through the normal budget process.
okay. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm kind of going back to, yeah, what are our priorities? What are some larger costs we know are gonna be coming our way?
So what I'm kind of hearing is that of the areas that Linda pointed out, the airport, the aquatic center, the City Library, the daycare, senior services, and the Ames History Museum, and
Trails.
the trails, sorry, I want to say Mike's ask. I wanted to be a little more specific, but yeah. It kind of sounds like what we want to say is to put it on an agenda and make that determination.
Make some decisions yeah, we need to make the decisions in public. Obviously, we're public now, but in an official board meeting. Yeah, I was suggesting putting all of those on the agenda and also having recommendations on possible funding.
Funding source.
Funding source, yeah, and we don't have to, you know, we don't have to do any of these. We don't have to do them in the amount that was asked. We know that, but that's something for discussion, for deliberation in a meeting. But just to know what our options are for funding. To just kind of have that in front of us would be really helpful.
And then in the meantime, getting some information from Leanne on what grants have been generally funded on there. And looking at if we want to have a process for entities for applying, looking at some of these, and this may be great where we get some help from you, is when is the Catalyst grant, or when are some of the other grants? Their timeline, you know, are some just rolling or some specifically, no, they're every quarter, is it every 2 months? Just so if we're wanting to do something that we're not cutting somebody, you know, potentially inadvertently cutting someone off because they're gonna have no time to meet a criteria.
Or creating a situation where people are just gonna come and ask outside of the,
Yeah, and
Established.
here's really my thought. It's, I mean, those groups know what they're planning to do. You know, the Birthmark Library didn't decide 2 weeks ago that they were going to be doing an expansion. They've been thinking about that for a while. And I'm just using them as an example, because they're the most recent group that's come to us. You know, it's really upon those agencies, you know, or those entities, whoever they are, to know if we say, this is when we take payments on our website, this is when we take funding applications. They know what their deadlines are and they need to work that in with when we're going to be looking at it.
And I don't know if there are some, like, and I'm thinking of transportation one, because I think, serving on the HERD board, that sometimes the feds will open up a grant application for HERD to apply to, but it's a really short time frame. You know, they're not gonna meet a quarterly one if they needed to come to us, for example, because it'll be like a 2 or 3 week time frame.
And
What do we do? Do we make exceptions in those? I mean, it doesn't be a case by case.
That's why we've never put anything in.
Right.
process. I mean, honestly, that is exactly why,
Yeah,
because there's no good way to say, we'll only accept in this time, this time. This time.
But I think what we do is you allow exceptions, but you just have to say, you don't have, if you allow exception by policy, you don't have a policy unless you use that exception very sparingly for darn good reason, if at all. You know, so that takes some discipline of saying, no, whoever, you know, just because you just, you know, it's a last minute thing, you just thought of us, no, that's not good enough. But if HERDA says, this came up, these are the deadlines, this is the public purpose, it's all, you know, that's, you know, met by this, then I think it's, you know, then I think it makes sense to make an exception if it is for the welfare of residents of Story County and it meets a need we can see.
I think that's something, because we also run a variety of boards of who may get some federal funding to find out a little bit on some of the grants that they may get, what's their kind of that time frame. That may just help us with as well what makes sense. And I get it. I mean, I'm the one who said, hey, maybe look at something quarterly or
Right.
finding out the other ones. But then I'm also saying, well, hey, you get some of these entities, they don't have control over
Yeah,
them. And
exactly.
I know her that they have one, they even said, hey, they're gonna have this grant that's gonna come open soon. And we're gonna have like 2 or 3 weeks to put it together. Now, not saying that they need a local match to it at all, but just
as an example.
as an example, yeah.
It also may point out the need for us to, and I'm talking to supervisors, not to Leanne, who's done a lot of this planning, but for us to get more serious about strategic planning and make sure that our strategic plans really meet our priorities and things that are there right now in front of us. I saw that when I was for transportation, just use this as an example. We don't talk about, you know, mostly what we talk about is roads, railroads, trails, when in fact we've gone past that and said there are some other needs here in terms of rail transportation. Yeah, and where and how do we prioritize that in terms of strategies? That's a difficult one. As I'm thinking about this, I'm going to get in the weeds because we got HERDA and say, well, HERDA does public transportation, but are we getting all the needs met? How are we being proactive in terms of saying these are what Story County's needs are and how does that fit into that process and funding? I don't know.
Right. Well, the other thing I just thought of too is, you know, our food banks. You know, oftentimes they're not going to plan, they're not going to know 3 months in advance what their needs are. I mean, they could, but they also may be, gosh, things have hit us.
There's a run on eggs.
Yeah.
For years and years,
or-
they were overflowing with eggs. And
Yeah, or you know,
Bird flu.
pandemic wise, that impacted a number of people. They
Turns
needed-
out at the grocery store last night was yogurt for me, so there you go.
see, you just never know.
Yeah,
See, and that's why kind of during the pandemic, they kind of understanding United Way, because they had their food
Right.
lines, and if you're running low, let us know, kind of thing.
Right,
That,
right.
yeah. Yeah, it's always gonna be messy, because needs don't pop up during deadlines,
Yeah, it's kind of like,
So,
the kid
but
doesn't get sick necessarily between.
but
8
it
and 5.
can be better. The process can be better is what I'm thinking.
Right, yep, 100% agree with you. It's how we make it better, how it makes sense, and that we don't make unintended situations occur, but then we're having to retract what we're just trying to. We have other things to discuss for today. I guess I could look back at your agenda.
So when do you want these, when do you think you want these on the agenda? Next agenda? This, yeah, next agenda?
Does the airport go on with no official ask?
No.
No,
Thank you.
Old airport, I'd say,
well, and I'm just wondering, I mean, I know the aquatic center has done an ask, but are they gonna be coming back because of the catalyst grant?
Yes, there was an announcement today, but Catalyst will be coming up. Not Catalyst, Tap Grant. will be coming up.
So wait on the,
So I'll get you more details on that, but the timeframe for applications. That's we're working on.
so what does that mean? Does the ask change from 500, or do we have the right number?
The right number, yes. The timeline is something I gotta finalize yet.
Got it, gotcha.
Okay, but
we have the ask
yeah,
We
so
do
we
have
can
the
put that on.
official.
for the pool.
Well, they've come for us,
Okay.
asking,
Yeah.
started out, with, what was it, $1 million?
2 million.
Dan came, I did
2
go
million.
back to look at the
It was 2 million.
agendas, but he was here with last fall,
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll look.
and I haven't looked for it. I just called him to ask to confirm the number yesterday.
Would you like an official email on that, just so you have it
That
for
wouldn't
your
hurt.
next meeting?
Sure. That wouldn't
Sure.
hurt. So let's put the aquatic center on, the birth park library, Slater daycare, because we need to make a decision.
decision, right?
Heartland Senior, Ames History Museum, Mike Cox's ask on the trails.
Yep.
And
I would say, would you have any information on the debris site by then or not? That would
I don't
matter.
think so.
Okay,
And
That's all of them. Have been addressed.
those are the ones that we've, yeah. I'd be interested in seeing something on bridges, but I'm not getting it in my mind how to actually ask. would be-
well, I want to know on that too, is, because when we went through budgeting for it, I remember our questions about asking, because there was an amount in their balance and stuff, could they do more? So I guess my question, I want to go back, is could they do more? I mean, I felt like it was, no, we're really at capacity of what we can
That
do.
was my question, was even if you had more funding, is it still a staff issue?
Yeah, that was what I,
Right,
that's what I
right.
got from him was that,
He
yes.
hired the technician, and we did approve the job description for the engineer. It's not technician, it's not the name, but we approved the job description for the
design
engineer, and he was gonna look at that second position, trying to recruit both ways. So maybe that'd be more likely to maybe ask in a few months, once he knows what the situation is can you, if we found, if you could dip further into your monies that you have available, how far would you feel comfortable dipping in, and what more could you do?
He did, he has verified that the remaining, and I don't know the exact amount in there right now, but the remaining 800,000 of the bonded dollars is not gonna be used, obviously, for what it was originally intended, but he has verified that he can use it for other or other projects.
But is that different than the carryover?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes,
So his
that-
carryover though,
yes.
that's for the motor grader, right?
No, his
No.
carryover is for just his budget, his normal budget that he
Yeah,
has
the
every
motor
year.
grader was already built in.
Those are built into the secondary roads fund, or
Yeah.
to the local option sales
So
tax.
it's not coming out of the carry.
No.
No, no.
No. Okay,
Unless he's
okay.
going to, okay. Yes. Let me rephrase that. He was talking about how much it was gonna cost to buy out the motor graders, correct?
Mhm.
That would be dependent on whether you're going to sign another lease for the next upcoming ones.
Oh.
Okay, so he's keeping some money back in case there isn't another lease and he needs to pay him off. If there's another lease, then there's not the balance needed to pay off the motor graders.
Okay.
When is the decision
Am I
made
right?
on the lease and who makes it?
Sorry, I was responding.
No, I'm taking a
Well,
look
that's
at the
my
lease.
Oh,
That's my
top early
understanding.
one. Yes.
Because we set aside 600,000 last time. And then put it toward the new lease. Okay? He would be the one you need to actually, how does this work?
Uh-huh,
The leases have been a good deal
uh-huh.
and he likes
Yeah.
how how that's working. So that would be my theory, is that you would go forward with that again, but that is public hearing and blah, blah,
So
blah,
then
blah,
to
blah.
follow up with Darren on that issue.
So
So what was
I'm,
the truck that what was the vehicle he was talking about that a year ago was like $200,000 less than what it is now? Is that the motor grader?
No.
No.
it's a truck, but
It's
the
a
motor
truck.
graders are gonna be more
the
expensive.
motor graders are gonna be
So
more
the leases are
expensive.
gonna be the same amount.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, it's gonna be 30% more, I mean.
See, last time we purchased one of the motor graders and kept it.
Yep.
Okay.
And then leased all the rest of them. So we kept the one in best condition,
Mhm.
paid for that
And I
out
don't
of
know
his
if he-
funds he kept.
Is he gonna do that again?
I think so. That was kind of the impression I got, but it will depend on the cost. So,
So-
he has an estimated 65% ending fund balance.
Right.
He needs about 1.2, he thinks, as an ending, 1.2 million as an ending fund balance. He's got about 5 million as an ending fund balance.
And that can be spent on roads and bridges.
Yes,
So.
plus
Sandra,
the 767,000 that he has in the borrowed funds.
Right, for those.
That is not
for those
gonna happen
projects.
with what he thought it was gonna happen with. He can spend it on roads and bridges also.
Latifah,
Yes,
my suggestion is that Sandra get with Darren and go over all of this and come up with a plan.
Mhm.
But
Because
you're exactly right. Part of his problems with spending those dollars was the staffing to be able to do it,
Mhm.
to oversee those projects.
And even with the additional staff, I mean, there's only so many projects.
Right, and even if you contract out,
Right.
he still has to have a supervisor or two on site, right? With the contractors.
Yeah. They go out.
Right, so I think that was part of my question is, he has some money to utilize before we're looking at infusing other dollars but how much more could he do?
Mhm.
exactly,
That's the thing,
If
if
I
I
had
like to allocate money and have it sit there.
and there's already money that's there.
There.
Right.
So. So when we had the last conversation with Darren and we were talking about trying to, develop the engineer job description, which we did. It was if you could, that might be easier to recruit for, then you get full force. Then what can you do with the monies you have in terms of getting some more bridges done? Yeah, there's only so many, but to get to know that before we get into throwing more money, as Lisa said, allocating more money for secondary roads that won't get used.
The other thing is the contractors.
How busy are
They're
they?
gonna be able to find, do they have
Right.
staff? Do they have, you know?
Sure, but unless we ask, we don't know.
No, absolutely.
That's what I'm saying. Let's ask for a plan of how we can, and, how we can, with current resources, do more on bridges in the upcoming fiscal and and also if it takes more resources, what are they? Because I've just sat through too many presentations on dangerous bridges, closing bridges,
Right,
um,
right.
being concerned about isolating people because if I have to close this bridge, how do these people get out? We are supportive of a plan, but we need to know what we need, what can be done now and what other resources are needed to do
Yeah, what realistically can be done.
it.
And that's one of the things I'll look at too, to bring forward is the funding requirements for secondary roads, to make sure that
Yes.
that's clear.
Yes, that would be.
I couldn't say the word requirements. I was writing this
It's
down.
such a complicated
It
budget.
is,
It's just amazing.
yes.
And, you're talking essential functions of county government.
Right,
This is, what's the
Right.
priorities? I think this just needs to be top. I mean, there's a lot of other things we can do to help county residents, but this is simply a
Right.
responsibility that we have. We
Right.
need to keep-
At the top.
Yes. I don't know, next week or 2 weeks, I don't know that we need the information back from Leanne about the economic development group funding and side grants. I think that's going to be helpful to us, but I don't know that we need that.
I think she just sent it to us.
We did, okay, then we've
It
got it.
isn't solid grant stuff yet.
So just some summary of projects. Okay, I just saw Buzz on these.
I haven't done the solid grant.
So next Tuesday, we'll talk about the aquatic center, the Bartlett Library, the Slater Daycare, Heartland, and Eames History Museum,
And the trails.
and the trails.
Do we need more information from conservation regarding the trails? Just the
It's always
memos?
nice to have additional.
I think that email is pretty
You got that?
clear, isn't it?
I have to go back and look at it.
Oh, I'll send that to you guys. 'Cause I don't think you need any more than that personally.
Okay.
Good.
I mean, that's my theory. He sent it to Linda and I.
I think I forwarded it to you.
Forwarded it to you, but
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I think I did, but I didn't
That's fine.
copy you on the forward, so you didn't know that. It's an email, great.
I mean,
I don't know if you need more information on that or not. That's been on the CIP for quite a few years. And I think a request was made of ARPA funds. So, I mean, you probably have everything. The only difference is the amount's less because he's asking for it as a match to the state funding.
Which are the aquatic center, I'm sorry. I was-
no, we're talking
No,
about
we're talking
our trail.
about part of our
We're still
nature.
on trails, okay.
They're on the meeting, not that you wanted to talk, but they we need more information.
Fine.
No,
So
Pat, should I?
Pat Sheehan,
Yes, I can't, yeah. Angle, I can't see very well.
All we do is payroll every 2 weeks, so we get used to saying last names.
we can always look back at my email and ask
Yeah.
questions.
My question would be, what if it was less than 3,000?
I asked him that already.
3 million?
3 million.
3 million?
3,000, I don't think we're anything in the ballpark. I think it would be proportional. I asked him, would it be just a total waste to do a smaller amount? And he said, no, he didn't think so.
One thing we talked about at my meeting the other night too is the number of grants, and you may be seeing this too, Greg, is the number of grants that are becoming available. But the percentage of local match is increasing to draw down that state match.
Yeah, Destination Islands, for example, that it was initially proposed to be 100% funding. That was what the announcement was. And when it came out, they had it subdivided into 3 different categories, from 60% to 100% local match. But I mean, the local match is part of it, and I think that's to offset the increased cost that we'll see.
Right.
That's why he said 2 million or 3 million from us would pull in 2 million. from them.
60/40, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
the 60% category.
Yeah, some of the other nonprofits, they're seeing for their grants that they're doing too.
Yeah, I was surprised that the match had to be more than what you could get. You're not used to seeing that.
Yeah, and they're also saying right now it's just because of quite frankly, all the cash out there right now for federal funding, state funding. They're also saying now pledges work in some cases instead of just having cash on hand, just because people are trying to catch up so fast. So you're going to be seeing more of that, saying we have pledges, bang, which qualifies for state grants, but maybe not. So it's going to be interesting to see for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting to see in the next 6 months, because that's also gonna include audits.
That's why it's going to be very interesting over the next 6 months.
Correct.
I was looking for my email and I didn't find it yet, but I will, but I'll find, if I found another one, and this is just follow up in terms of our ARPA money. The Hickory Grove Park wastewater 2080 has been reviewed and approved by Polo's attorney. May 2nd city council, placed on May 9th conservation board, and May 10th. That's good news. We're actually gonna
Oh, my.
Do you have an email about the Army Corps of Engineers?
Don't be ridiculous.
That was Jim Peace's reply.
Don't be ridiculous.
Who was that? Ted's reply? Somebody replied, the Army Corps of Engineers. Yeah, well, that's the other one we're waiting for. But getting that done is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that was so long, and I'm just glad that's finally. That's it easier to talk about water quality.
So,
Huh?
I can't hear you, Leanne.
There's more. I'm just asking Lisa how much we have left in TIF debt,
Debt?
for what we borrowed.
Four? Guesstimate?
For.
Yeah.
That all help.
The first, no. Yes, yes, it is, because the Dinkins is paid off. I just processed a claim to pay that one off. The Dinkins off.
Yay.
Right.
Okay. I think that all these other ones then. Lisa, did you say you were gonna look for what Dan Colleen sent us last?
I put a note to myself for fall, yes. It was on the fall board agenda at some point in time.
I was thinking it was fall.
For the flag.
Yeah, the last presentation he made.
It was fall of 2021. Yes. But that number was higher. So the new number, you want that confirmed, right?
I want the new number,
The
if
new
you
number,
were,
so
mhm.
we'll have,
be so kind.
we'll send the new number.
Either Lisa or Linda, if you have that email, I know Linda, you forwarded to us from Mike.
Yeah, I got that on
If
my
you could
notes.
just forward that,
Yeah.
I just.
I'm gonna send you that
Yeah.
and the Attorney General
Oh, that'd
1979.
be great.
opinion.
Yes.
That'd be great.
That is the guiding principle for me every time I have to do something.
Okay, well, this is helpful, but I mean, I still feel like a month from now, we might be looking at another list just like this.
Well, and that's probably okay, but that's also why we should get started on the process. So we get ahead of it at some point, because I had just on my informal list, I have a lot of things that have been mentioned to me that have never come back, and I think a lot of them probably won't happen, but some of them will.
Yeah, and I have a few in my mind too. And I also have in my mind things that I would like to see us, that, you know, I think we all do, like to see us funding. So I would like to at some point have some kind of conversation around where like, strategic plan, visioning, that was not what today was for, but
it shows the need for it.
yeah.
I agree with you totally.
So on that, there's funding, you approved in your budget for next fiscal year to bring a consultant in to guide Story County through that.
For a
And
strategic plan.
For a strategic plan update. Processing. And my initial schedule, I think, was I was hoping in April I could start building an RFP and start those discussions, but with the reassignment of responsibilities, did I say May or June? I don't remember.
I was thinking you said.
Yeah,
May.
we were all
I
in
was
that.
thinking you said, I think you said May or at the earliest.
What would you be doing?
Drafting an RFP and getting that out there. So part of the drafting the RFP is getting what we really want collectively in a strategic plan process.
We're due in 23.
Yeah, 29, 19 to 23.
2019 to 23.
You did an RFP back then.
First time we did it, we had consultants, second time staff did it, third time we had consultants.
And the cost was.
Get budget.
Last time we paid for it.
The
Last time was 15,000, so it.
I think next iteration would be higher.
Who did the last one?
RDG?
We
No,
were
JEO.
I think we had 3 companies. And RFPs. It's
Lots of them did, yeah.
Input out of state extension. We asked for proposals.
We asked you and I, University of Iowa, Public. You remember the name of the institute, Public Decision Making Institute, and Iowa, because they did the first go around.